guys, and welcome back to my channel. So you guys asked for a skort, and of course I'm gonna give you a skort. So in this episode, we're actually going to make a really nice skort, which is going to end up looking something like this. So you can see that I had like two different back designs, I guess. It's going to be the lower one because I didn't like how much yellow was in the other one. But the front is what you see right there, and this is going to be the back. So it's going to have this really cool wavy design, and it's going to be a jeans basically. So we're going to make it out of denim fabric and then also out of cotton canvas fabric, which is really sturdy because it has a lot of weight to it. And I was so lost, you guys, because I've never done a skort before. So there was a lot of thinking going into this process, and I figured I'd start with my jeans that I already made. So these are my jeans Matilda that are available on my Etsy store as well, and I also have a YouTube video on these pants specifically, so if you're interested, go ahead and click in the eye and you can watch that one. In fashion design or in pattern making generally, it's normal to, have the easiest way possible, since it is a hassle to start a new pattern from scratch for every design that you're doing. Therefore, if you have the option, you are obviously building your pattern onto a pattern that you already constructed, that already fits and that is close to your design, so that you can use it as a base block. In my case, this was my jeans Matilda. They worked perfectly fine for this skort, so I advise you to actually go ahead and watch that video as well, because I'm going way more into detail about making the jeans, about sewing the jeans, about the flat felt seams that you see most commonly in jeans, and so on. So I highly advise you go watch that video first, because you continue watching this one. But going back to what I'm actually doing on screen, you already saw me actually shortening the pants, because the skort is going to be a mini skort, and then I went ahead and actually mirrored my front and back pants, because I'm going to have this pattern on the front and back. Therefore I needed two sides to actually draw the pattern onto the front and back respectively, and you can see me draw in here the flap that's gonna create the skirt impression of these jeans. I decided to do this wavy line right there because I thought it would look really nice with the wavy design on the skort generally. So that's what you see me do here, and it's really interesting. That diamond shape in the very center is actually the only difference from pants to a skirt, because that's a crotch area. Just an interesting fact. If you put the center front or the center back together, it's going to create this shape. I drew in these dividing lines because on my right leg it's actually gonna be a division, whereas on the left leg that's just for me to see where the flap is gonna end up sitting on the left side, like the overlap basically. And I'm already drawing in my design. I also changed the pockets a tiny bit, so they're not the typical jeans pockets which are more wide. They're more long because I really wanted to have like big pockets. You guys really went in the comments on my other jeans video about how my pockets were too small, which by the way made sense, because otherwise they were just gonna pop open since those jeans were tighter at the waist. These ones are more loose, so there's no problem with having pockets like this. But now that my front design is already done, I can continue with the back design. I'm gonna come back to the front in just a second. For the back piece, I put the yoke into the pattern piece again because I didn't need it as a separate pattern piece. So I'm just making sure that the lines are correct and they look all smooth and so on before mirroring the whole pattern piece again, so that I have the same surface to work on as for my front piece, which I need to draw in the design again. By the way, everything that you can see here on my screen, you can totally do on paper as well. I'm doing exactly the same steps. I'm just doing it digitally so I can go ahead and print out the design and then also grade it and prepare it for Etsy and stuff. So don't worry if you don't have Adobe Illustrator or you don't know how this works or whatever, you can simply do exactly the same on paper. After I was happy how the design looks, I actually went ahead and made the pockets a bit bigger on the back piece because they looked a bit small on the surface area. I'm copying out both of the back legs because left and right will be different, so everything needs to be a separate pattern piece. In the end, you're gonna see how it looks when I have it printed out, and I'm really happy with the result. But continuing on with the front piece, because we're not done yet, we have to copy out all of our pattern pieces as well, and those are a tiny bit more complicated because we have this overlap. So obviously we have left and right pant leg, but then also from the dividing line on the right leg, we have the overlap. So the flap that's gonna make this whole thing look like a skirt. So we don't just need this flap, we also need a facing for the flap. We also need the leg side that's gonna go to the crotch and also to the back leg, which is gonna hide underneath the flap. So there's a whole lot of pattern pieces that need to be finished yet, and yeah, it's more or less just me copying out the stuff that I already made, as you can see right here, and then making sure that all the lines are still aligning, especially for the pattern. I really wanted the whole pattern to just continue throughout the whole skirt after I was done with sewing it, because this can be really tricky, especially if you have so many layers on top of each other. So I made sure that it really was perfect, or as perfect as I could get it, since this is a piece that you will wear and you are moving, so it's never going to be perfect, but I did my best so that if you choose to remake this, your result is going to look as nice as it possibly can. Before actually making the SKORT in the specific color variations, I printed out a tryout, so I didn't put like any indications and whatnot into the pattern pieces yet. Of course, if you choose to buy my pattern, there will be all of the indications that you need in the pattern in the end, so don't worry about that. But for the mock-up, obviously, I wanted to check if the fit was correct, and you don't need to have the color blocks and everything for checking how the fit was. So I went ahead and cut out the pattern pieces without the dividing lines, without the pattern being cut up in multiple pieces, just to make sure that the actual pattern looks good, fits well, and so on and so forth, because there were a few things that I still needed to check, which I wasn't able to do on the computer, which was, for example, the length of the pants. Are those good? Does it look nice? Do I need to shorten them, and so on? So I went ahead and cut out all of my pattern pieces out of my mock-up fabric. This is just a normal mock-up fabric, so a cotton muslin undyed, nothing special. And here is a good example why you need to do mock-ups. I totally forgot the pockets, or at least half of the pockets. So I didn't prepare the pocket itself, the pocket facing, I didn't prepare the cutout, and so on. So it's always great to have this option of trying out what you did before you start working with your actual fabric. And after I was done with my mock-up, this is actually what it ended up looking. So it came out pretty nice, to be honest. The only thing that I had to change, it was two things actually that I had to change, which was the length in general, which was already a thing that I knew that I will have to change. I wanted to shorten the thing around 7 centimeters, and then obviously also there's going to be a waistband attached to the whole thing, which I didn't do yet because it's unnecessary for a mock-up. And then the other thing that I wanted to change is actually the width of the flap. Like, I wanted it to be more further to the side seam. And yeah, apart from that, it looked really promising. You can see the impression of a skirt, but hey, it's actually pants. I already did the placement for the different colors in my mock-up, but I went ahead and also changed everything on the computer for my pattern as well. And this is quite similar to my jersey dress that I did. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm gonna link it up here in the eye, because it has these stripes in the pattern itself. And what I did for that was that I made a complete pattern and then just put the pieces inside, but didn't split the pieces. So you were able to cut out the whole dress without the pattern, and also cut out the individual pattern pieces if you wanted to make the geometrical pattern in it. And I did exactly the same for these pants, or for the SKORT right here as well. So if you want to have a unicolored SKORT, you can do that, as the pieces look, for example, like the pocket right here. So you have the complete pocket, but you could also cut out the individual pattern pieces and make them out of the corresponding fabric color. So everywhere where you find this, like the name, the pattern piece name, and my logo and the grain line, in a piece, it is a separate pattern piece, and you can go ahead and cut it out of your size. Obviously for the pockets, as the size is the same for every size, the pattern is only in one line, so every size needs to cut that out. But then also in the other pattern pieces, you will have the usual 7 lines for the respective sizes. So just that you know what I'm talking about, you can see quite clearly here what I mean. And I'm going to put the pattern together right now, and then you're going to see it even better. Okay, so let's do that. So now that I cut everything out, you can see what I meant before. So let me grab a piece that has the most lines in it. So this here would be the side front of the right side, where this piece would be attached, and you can see that the lines just continue into the other piece. Now if you want to actually make this like I will be doing it in separate colors, you will find the indicated colors on every pattern piece separately. So here would be the symbols for indicating a pattern piece. So what I will be doing is actually cut this piece on my respective line. So I am doing size S, so I am going for the continuous line right here, and I'm cutting these pieces in half. But keep in mind, if you don't want to do this with separate colors, you can just leave the pattern piece as is and use this for your skort and have a unicolored skort. It works the same way. So this is basically a 2-in-1. Either you want to have the wavy pattern with the different color blocks, or you want to have like a whole unicolored skort, then you can go ahead and use these pattern pieces. But I'm gonna go and cut everything in pieces now. I also separated the pattern pieces into 3 different piles. Those are the different colors that I will be cutting out. The pockets get cut out for left and right sides out of different colors. So it says it right here, cut it once out of color 1 for the right side and cut it once for color 3 for the left side. So you also have to keep in mind, if you have a right and wrong side on your fabric, that you also need to turn the pattern piece around according to the side that you're working on. So I will be cutting out this out of my white color and then also out of my yellow color. Mine don't have a right or wrong side, so it doesn't matter for me. But keep in mind, if you do, you need to figure out which side you need to put onto the fabric in order to cut them out correctly. So I have all of my pattern pieces cut out right now out of the different colors, and before I start putting anything together regarding the shape, I have to puzzle the respective pattern pieces back together. So I laid it out how it will be put together. So this is, as you can see, the right back piece, this is the left back piece. And what I will be doing now, because I also want to add top stitches to all of those pattern pieces, is that I'm just gonna put them together with a white thread or whatever, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just gonna put them right sides together and sew across and then do nothing. Iron them flat, and then I can top stitch whatever I need to top stitch. And then, also very important, add interfacing tape. Because these are all very much cut into pieces, it's not that easy to figure out where interfacing needs to go. For example, the side seam or the back seams, or also the front, doesn't really matter. So all of these things are completely split in pieces, and before I want to add the tape, I want to sew everything together. So that's what we're gonna do right now. So now that everything is put together, I will be ironing all of those seams, I guess just in the direction that they fold already. Hi, it's editing me. Actually, what you need to do right now is overlock all the seams. I totally forgot about that. I see my mistake after I ironed everything, but just for the sake of the order, you go ahead and overlock all of your seams right now. I also went ahead and overlocked around every pattern piece so that all of the overlocking is completely done, and we can go ahead and continue. Also regarding ironing, because I'm saying I'm just gonna iron towards where the fabric already folds, which is nonsense actually, because the seam allowances indicate where you're gonna top stitch, and if you have, you know, on your side seam the back and the front leg, and the seam allowances go in opposite directions, you're gonna have like one red top stitch, one yellow top stitch, or whatever. So actually think about where you want to iron your seam allowances to, because that's actually gonna indicate where your top stitches are, and you want them to be continuous. So I will see what I should be doing there. I completely forgot to overlock the seams. So obviously before you put any interfacing tape on, that's my mistake, you would need to overlock all of these dividing seams so that they don't fray. Now it's time to put interfacing on. I decided to put interfacing tape on all of the side seams, on all of the center front and center back seams, on the pocket seam, so the very curvy seams where you will attach the pockets. This one, you can see it right here. And then also I went ahead and put interfacing completely on all of the waistband and onto the facing of my flap. I went ahead and prepared my waist belt, which is just folding it in half and ironing it, and then we can continue putting all of the actual pattern pieces together. So now that everything is prepared with the tape and also of course overlocked and put together, we are going to start with the front pockets. We're going to take the two pieces that have the pockets cut out. This right here is the right front piece with the front dividing line, and this one is the left front piece. We're going to take the one pocket with the cutout itself, and we're going to put right sides together with the cutout of the front piece. That we're gonna sew at 1 centimeter, turn around, and then top stitch. Before we flip the pocket over and fold it correctly, we actually need to cut into the seam allowance for the curve to ease better into place once folded. So that's what I'm doing right here. I'm just cutting towards the seam at around a 1 to 2 centimeters distance. Once that is done, it's very easy to just fold it and iron it. I iron it so that the ditch of the seam is actually not visible on the front, but just on the side where the pocket is, so the wrong side of the fabric. So before we actually top stitch the seams that we just sewed, I want to sew the flap together. This right here is this wavy piece. So I'm just gonna go ahead and sew right here, sew the waves together and actually turn this whole thing over. Once done with sewing the flap right sides together, you actually need to cut down the seam allowance to around 2 to 5 millimeters, depending on what fabric you're using. The thicker the fabric, the more seam allowance you need to leave there. And then you can turn it around and also iron it so that the ditch of the seam is only visible on the facing side. Next up is putting the center back together, and you need to make sure that the seams align right here. I like to just put a pin at 1 centimeter into the seam right there in order to assure that they meet, and then just go ahead and stitch at 1 centimeter. This is what it's gonna look like, and you can see how perfect the lines actually follow through the two pattern pieces. I went ahead and ironed the seam towards one side doesn't really matter actually. I decided to put it towards the left side, just iron it nicely and prepare it for top stitching. And we're gonna top stitch in a specific order because we have to top stitch in different colors depending on where your seam allowance is ironed towards. We have to, top stitch red first, then yellow, and then white. I chose to do white as the last stitching color because I also chose to stitch my pockets, my back pockets, onto my pants using white thread. I am doing a top stitch pretty close to the edge, and then I'm gonna do another top stitch 5mm away, which is just the size of my presser foot. Speaking of pockets, I actually went ahead and ironed the seam allowance to the inside of the pockets, so I prepared for stitching, and the first thing that I am doing is actually top stitching the upper corner, so where you put your hands in, basically the opening. I'm top stitching at 5mm and then again at 5mm. And can you see how perfect they actually align? I am so happy that this worked out the way it was supposed to. So I am pinning my pockets onto my back pieces and then just top stitching them onto the back piece in the same manner, so very close to the edge, and then again at 5mm from that seam. Since I was already at it, I also top stitched the center back seam towards one side that I already ironed it to. And of course I also top stitched all of the remaining white seams that I still didn't do, as well as the flap. I thought it looked really nice if I have a contrasting stitch on the wavy pattern, so I also did this very close to the edge seam and then another one 5mm next to it. Next up is the zipper. So we're gonna put an invisible zipper into the front, and there are notches in the pattern as per usual, so that is where the zipper is gonna get attached to. Just sew the zipper in from the waistline towards the notch and close the remaining center front seam. After ironing, it should look something like this. Moving on to actually attaching the flap that's gonna hide the zipper and also the leg. So this is gonna actually make the impression that this is a skirt from the front. We're gonna put wrong side of the flap onto the right side of the inner right leg. Sorry, this is like complicated. And then we're gonna put right sides of the outer right leg onto this sandwich of flap and inner right leg, and there are intersections again, so you need to make sure that those meet because they're going to be prominently in the very front of your right leg. So be sure to really be careful and prepare your pattern accordingly, because this is going to be very visible if you make a mistake here. This is what it's going to end up looking, and it looks kind of wobbly, but it actually is really nicely done. If you iron it, which will be the next step, iron the seam allowance towards the side seam, you'll actually see that the lines actually continue quite nicely throughout the piece, so I'm pretty proud of that. After you're done ironing, you need to top stitch this seam again, and this was hard because my machine actually gave up. It totally gave up, so I had to stitch this on my leather machine, and I continued stitching the rest of the pants on my leather machine. So I really advise you, make sure to check if your machine is able to handle so many layers of denim or canvas fabric, because mine is an industrial machine, a good machine, and it didn't handle it anymore. So any thinner fabric, sure, no problem, but denim, make sure to test. Now it's the perfect time to sew the pockets together. You can stitch along at 1 centimeter and then also overlock the pockets so they don't fray. And look at that, that's the front piece already completely done. This is really nice, and next up we're already putting the pants together. So we're already heading towards the end, and I'm really happy with this piece. So we're gonna put side seams together of front and back piece, right sides together, and pin so that all of the intersections meet, and then we can go ahead and stitch at 1 centimeter. And I'm terribly sorry about this horrible camera. I'm constantly bumping against my tripod, which is way too low for this machine, as it has like this arm, so it's higher. I am trying to figure it out, I'm very sorry. Yeah. I top stitched the seam allowance towards the back piece, which you can see right there at around 3 millimeters distance. That's just what my presser foot of my leather machine measures, like the width of it. So just do whatever you want, actually, like honestly. And I ironed it, and after I stitched, you can iron it before you stitch. It really doesn't matter, it's completely up to you. This is what I did, and it worked out perfectly fine. And I think it also looks really, really nice. Next up, the waistband. So just for your info, I made the waistband like kind of too difficult or too complicated, and I completely changed the waistband for the actual pattern that you can get on my Etsy. So you won't have that dividing seam anymore in that. That was just my rescue plan. So you will have one continuous waistband pattern, of course, and then also just one piece of fabric, obviously. But nevertheless, you will have to iron the seam allowance of one side up, doesn't matter which side, one of the two long sides, just to prepare for stitching the waistband later on. Once you're done ironing that, you need to actually put the right sides of the small edges of the waistband together, just like I'm showing you right here, and stitch at 1 centimeter. So on both sides, you want to do that. And you're also only going to stitch to the fold that you just ironed. Again, sorry for the terrible camera work. I'm going to change it after this, I think. So I'm just stitching what I just explained, the short ends of my waistband together, because now I can go ahead and actually turn everything around. So as you can see right here, I'm just holding the edge and then turning it around and then using some helper to actually push the edge out. And it's important that you only stitch towards the fold, because the fold is going to get folded into the whole waistband, as you can see right there. And if you were to stitch that onto the other side, you're not going to be able to do that. You might also have to cut away some seam allowance in order to fold it nicely. I give it one last press before I continue preparing my belt loops. The belt loops are just one continuous piece of fabric, which is 3 centimeters thick. It already has the seam allowance included, which is written on the pattern. And I went ahead and overlocked the long sides of the piece, because this is going to get turned towards the inside and ironed flat in order to prepare for stitching both sides down. You'll end up with this long strip for the belt loops, and you want to cut out 5 individual belt loops which measure 8 centimeters each, and there's plenty for those 5. Now you want to pin the belt loops to the skirt itself. There are notches in the pattern indicating where to put them, so you can always go ahead and just check where you want to put your belt loops. In the pattern there are 2 right next to the front pockets, then there are 2 a bit further into the back piece next to the side seam, and then 1 in the center back. You can go ahead and pin the waistband also onto the wrong side of your skirt. So you want to pin the not ironed side, right sides, onto the wrong side of your skirt, because then it's going to be easier to actually finish the waistband nicely without having any like seam allowances shown at all. And you just want to pin from the zipper on one side over the other side of the zipper onto the flap of the right front piece. So it's going to go all the way over and on top of the other side of the waistband. And now you can actually see why it's so important to iron the seam allowance of one of the long sides of your waistband up, because if you turn around your waistband and put all of the remaining seam allowances of your skirt piece inside of the waistband, it's just gonna fold over top of all of these seams, and it's going to hide all of them, and it's going to look so nice, and the only thing left to do is just top stitching the waistband close. But before you're going to stitch the waistband close, you actually want to iron the seam allowances inside of the waistband. You can see me iron all of the seam allowances up right here, and that's just going to ensure that everything is going to lay neat and tidy, and you're going to have no problems whatsoever while sewing. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. I'm just pinning the waistband, as I just said, so that it's covering the seam that I just sewed to attach the waistband. So that's what you see me do right here in order to prepare for top stitching, which is the next step. I am actually top stitching quite close to the edge, first like on the lower side to attach the waistband completely, and then I am turning on the far end to go up and then around like the whole waistband. So I'm basically just like top stitching it all the way around. After I'm done with that, I am attaching my belt loops. I'm just folding them, as you can see right here, and bar tacking them onto the waistband, as you can see right here. And that's basically it. The last thing that you need to do is put the metal wear in. So I'm putting some snap buttons in. I decided on silver snap buttons. This is just approximate. I didn't put the placement of the snap buttons into my pattern because it's very dependent on your body. So better fit the SKORT on yourself and then determine the placement of the snap buttons. And I forgot to like film the other, like the actual putting in the buttons part. I don't know why, but this is what it ended up looking. So I added another one right at the seam right here onto the flap because it kind of like opened up and that wasn't really nice. And then I added 4 of the male parts of the snap buttons, I guess, onto the pockets just in order to give them more strength because they are prone to just ripping out. Alternatively, you can also just put a bar tack right there. It does the same thing, but I thought it looked really, really nice with metal wear there. And that concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I had so much fun working on this project, you guys, because I mean, you know me, I've said it plenty of times, I really enjoy working with thicker fabrics generally, so this was the perfect project for me. And then on top of that, with all of those dividing seams and this little bit more effort that I put in this project, or in the pattern specifically, was just a plus in general. So I really, really enjoyed this project and I hope you did too. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. I have plenty of more videos just like this on my channel. Please follow me also on my socials. The handle is exactly the same as here on YouTube. I am sharing lots of behind the scenes footage of me working on my projects, my cat, and my life generally. It's a lot of stuff that I am doing. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and follow me there also. I bet you won't regret it. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!